The air was heavy that afternoon, thick with the scent of old wood, and something else, something sharp and electric, that hummed beneath every polite smile and strained greeting. We were gathered in the family's ancestral home, the kind of place that had been standing longer than most of us had been alive. Dark oak paneling portraits of stern ancestors lining the walls, and the hush of generations echoing in every corner. She stood at the center of it all, the golden girl Marissa. Her laughter rang out like a bell, bright and cold, as she moved from room to room, accepting congratulations and whispered alliances. She looked every inch the victor, her hair carefully done, her posture perfect, a glint of something triumphant in her eyes. I watched her from the doorway, the weight of her words still clinging to my skin like cobwebs. She'd orchestrated it all, weaving her narrative with the kind of ease that came from years of practice. She was the favorite, the one who always knew what to say, how to tilt her head, just so to get everyone on her side. She'd won the family's battle. Or so she thought. The estate had been the source of whispers and quiet resentments for as long as I could remember. Who would get the house? Who would be trusted with the heirlooms tucked away in velvet-lined boxes? My grandmother's journals, my grandfather's war medals, the safe in the study that no one had opened in years. All of it was more than just things, it was history, legacy, proof of belonging. Marissa had always been sure it would be hers, and she'd been right. The will was read that morning, the words formal and final. The house, the contents, all hers. She'd stood there, her expression a careful mask of surprise, though we all knew she'd been expecting it. She'd played the role of the devoted granddaughter perfectly, and the family had eaten it up. Now, as she accepted their congratulations, I saw the flicker of something darker in her eyes, satisfaction, like she'd finally proven what she'd always wanted to believe, that she was the only one who mattered. I could feel the others around me, shifting uncomfortably, their smiles brittle. They knew, even if they wouldn't say it out loud, that this wasn't just a victory, it was a conquest. Marissa had always known how to play the game, and she played it better than anyone. But what she didn't know, what none of them seemed to realize, was that the game wasn't over. I slipped out of the room, the low murmur of conversation following me down the hall. My footsteps were silent on the old wooden floors, the weight of history pressing in on me from all sides. I found myself standing in front of the study door, my hand resting on the worn brass knob. The safe was in there, a hulking thing built into the wall behind the old oak desk. My grandfather's pride and joy, a place where he kept the things that mattered most. No one had opened it in years, not since he'd passed. The combination was a secret he'd shared with only one person. Me. Marissa didn't know that. She thought she'd already claimed it all, the house, the stories, the right to rewrite the past. But the safe still held the final piece, and she had no idea what was waiting for her behind that cold steel door. I let my hand fall away from the knob and took a step back. I could hear Marissa's laughter echoing down the hallway, bright and brittle, and I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. She thought she'd won the family battle. She thought she'd buried the rest of us under the weight of her charm and ambition. But the safe didn't care about charm. The safe only cared about the truth. And soon she would find out exactly what that meant. The next morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of autumn day that smelled like leaves and crisp air. I woke up early, the sun barely cresting the edge of the horizon. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy with everything left unsaid. Marissa had spent the night in what used to be my grandparents' bedroom, claiming it as her own the moment the will was read. I wondered if she'd even pause to think about the memories still lingering in those walls, the laughter, the arguments, the soft lull of my grandmother's piano playing late into the night, or if to her it was just another sign that she'd won. I dressed slowly, my hands steady as I buttoned my shirt. Today felt different, like the weight of the family's history was pressing in on me from every angle. The safe was calling to me like it had been waiting for this moment all along. I found Marissa in the kitchen, the morning light catching on her hair as she sipped her coffee. She looked up when I walked in, her smile, polite but distant. "Morning," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "I hope you slept well." I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. I did, thank you. She watched me for a moment, her eyes narrowing just slightly. You've been quiet since yesterday, she said. I thought you'd be, I don't know, more upset. I shrugged. What's there to be upset about? You got what you wanted. Her smile twitched at the edges, like she wasn't sure whether to take my words at face value or look for the hidden barb. She decided to let it go, turning her attention back to her phone. I took my coffee to the porch, the air cool against my skin as I leaned against the railing. The garden stretched out in front of me, wild and overgrown, the roses my grandmother had planted years ago, still blooming stubbornly in the fall air. I remembered how she used to say that the roses were like family, they might fight for space, but they always found a way to bloom together. I wondered what she would have thought of all this, of Marissa's quiet conquest of the way the family had splintered under the weight of old promises and silent resentments. I wondered if she'd known it would come to this when she left everything to Marissa, or maybe she'd known exactly what she was doing. I finished my coffee and went back inside my steps, quiet on the worn wooden floors. Marissa was still in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. As she whispered into it, her tone hushed but urgent. She looked up when she saw me, her expression shuddered. I'll call you back, she said quickly, hanging up and slipping the phone into her pocket. Just some last-minute things to sort out, she said lightly. There's so much to manage now. I'm sure there is, I said. She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. I'm going to open the safe today, she said, her voice calm, but with a thread of excitement running through it. I thought, well, since it's part of the inheritance, I should see what's inside. I raised an eyebrow. Do you have the combination? She looked at me, her expression carefully neutral. I assumed it would be with the lawyer's papers. Or maybe it's written down somewhere in the study. I almost laughed at that, at how sure she was that the world would always arrange itself for her convenience. But I just nodded. Maybe. She tilted her head, studying me. You don't happen to know it, do you? I met her gaze, letting the silence stretch between us. Maybe I do, I said softly. Maybe I don't. She frowned, but didn't push it. Well, I'll find it, she said finally, her voice brisk. I've waited long enough. I watched her walk out of the kitchen, her steps quick and determined. She was so sure she'd find the answers she wanted, in that safe more proof that she was the rightful heir, the one who deserved it all. But what she didn't know was that the safe didn't hold the kind of treasure she was expecting. It wasn't money or jewelry or some hidden deed to the house. My grandfather had told me that much. What's in there, he'd said, isn't about wealth. It's about truth. And truth has a way of upending even the most carefully crafted stories. I spent the rest of the morning wandering the house, memories pressing in on me with every step. The faded floral wallpaper in the upstairs hallway, the worn grooves in the banister where generations of hands had rested. This house was a living thing, holding all our secrets, all our battles in its bones. I paused outside the study, my hand resting on the door. Inside the safe waited solid and silent behind the old oak desk. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice, quiet and steady, in the back of my mind. Remember, it's not about who opens it first, he'd said. It's about who's ready to hear what it has to say. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The heavy desk, the battered leather armchair, the shelves lined with books, whose spines had been worn smooth by my grandfather's hands. The safe was set into the wall, its brass handle dull with age. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, feeling the weight of it beneath my touch. I could almost feel my grandfather there with me, his presence as solid as the steel. I remembered the day he'd shown me the combination. His fingers steady as he turned the dial, the numbers etched into my memory, like a secret promise. Marissa would find her way in here soon. She'd find the safe, the promise of one final prize to claim. But she had no idea what she was about to open. No idea that the safe held the truth she'd spent years trying to bury. And I was ready to let her find it. Because this wasn't about me winning or her losing. It was about the truth about the weight of the past and the cost of pretending it doesn't matter. I left the study and went back to the porch, the chill of the afternoon air sharp in my lungs. Marissa would open the safe today. She'd think it was just another step in her victory, another piece of the family's story she'd finally taken for herself. But what she didn't know was that the safe wasn't just metal and paper. It was everything she'd tried to erase. And when she opened it, she wouldn't find the validation she'd been searching for. She'd find the truth. And the truth, I thought as I looked out at the tangled garden, has a way of rewriting everything. By late afternoon, the house had settled into a tense, expectant hush. The weight of Marissa's impending triumph, or what she thought was triumph, seemed to vibrate through the walls. Each creak of the floorboards, a reminder that something was about to change. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters with deliberate care, when I heard her footsteps, quick, precise, her heels tapping out a determined rhythm across the polished wood floors. She swept in like a queen into a throne room, her chin high, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I found it," she said, holding up a small brass key, her voice low and triumphant. "The combination. It was in the old ledger in the library." I raised an eyebrow, not bothering to hide my faint smile. Of course she'd found it. Marissa had always had a talent for finding what she wanted, what she thought she deserved. But she didn't know that the safe was never about the combination. It was about the truth waiting inside. "I'm going to open it," she said, her tone daring me to object. I just nodded. "It's your inheritance," I said calmly. "Go ahead." She hesitated, her eyes searching my face for any sign of hesitation. I gave her none. The truth was, I wanted her to open it. I wanted her to see what was inside. Because I knew that once she did, the story she'd built around herself would never be the same. Marissa turned and walked out her steps, sharp and sure. I followed at a distance, the quiet of the house swallowing our footsteps as we made our way to the study. The room was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, the dust motes dancing in the soft light. The safe stood silent and waiting behind the massive oak desk, its brass handle worn smooth by years of careful use. It looked unassuming, just another relic of a family that had always prized appearances over honesty. Marissa crossed the room and knelt in front of it, the key trembling just slightly in her hand. I watched her, my expression calm, my heart steady. She took a slow breath, as if trying to calm the excitement and maybe the fear thrumming through her. She turned the dial slowly, the soft clicks of the lock filling the silence. I could see the way her shoulders tightened, the way her breath caught as she reached the final number. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. She pulled the handle, and with a quiet groan of old hinges, the safe door swung open. Inside was a single stack of papers, yellowed with age, bound neatly with a faded blue ribbon. Marissa reached for them, her fingers brushing over the brittle edge of the top page. Her eyes flicked up to me, uncertain now, the triumph in her gaze faltering. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. I stepped forward, my tone gentle. "Read it." She hesitated, then pulled the stack out and set it on the desk. The first page was written in my grandfather's careful looping script, a letter dated nearly 30 years ago. Marissa's eyes darted over the lines, her lips moving soundlessly as she read. I watched the color drain from her face, the self-assured set of her shoulders collapsing as the truth sank in. My grandfather's letter was a confession, a detailed account of the family's real history. The debts he'd hidden, the deals he'd made to keep the house from being taken, the quiet sacrifices he'd demanded from my parents and uncle to keep the family afloat. And woven through it all was the truth about Marissa's mother, the sister who'd been cut out of the will years before, not because she'd been disloyal, but because she'd discovered the secrets my grandfather had tried so hard to bury. Marissa's hands trembled as she turned the pages, each word a blow to the story she'd told herself. The inheritance she'd fought so hard to claim wasn't the prize she thought it was. It was a burden, one she'd never seen coming. "You didn't know," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered. "Because you never wanted to listen," I said softly. "You were too busy trying to win." She sank back into the chair, the papers clutched in her hands like a lifeline. For a moment, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, no longer the conqueror, no longer the bright, perfect heir. just a girl who'd spent her whole life trying to claim a crown that was never really hers. I let the silence stretch between us, giving her time to let the truth sink in. I could see the fight flicker in her eyes, the instinct to twist the narrative, to find some way to make this just another chapter in her story of triumph. But the weight of the words in her hands was too heavy, too real. Finally, she looked up at me, her voice hoarse. "Did you know about this?" I nodded. "Grandfather told me before he died. He wanted me to know the truth so someone would. So the family wouldn't keep repeating the same mistakes." She pressed her lips together, the tears in her eyes shimmering in the fading light. "So what now?" she whispered. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I shrugged, my tone gentle but firm. "That's up to you. But you can't pretend it doesn't matter anymore. The safe didn't just hold papers, Marissa. It held the truth, and you can't hide from it." She sat there silent, her fingers tracing the edges of the papers, as if she could somehow erase the words written there. But I knew she couldn't. The truth had a way of staying alive even when we tried to bury it. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving her there with the weight of everything she'd never wanted to see. The hallway felt different as I stepped back into it, lighter somehow, like the house itself was breathing a little easier. As I walked past the portraits of our ancestors, I paused and looked up at them, stoic faces, captured in fading oil paint. I wondered if they'd be proud of me for finally letting the truth out, or if they'd be disappointed that the careful facade they'd built had finally cracked. But in the end, it didn't matter. The truth was out. The safe was open, and the story Marissa had spent her whole life telling herself was over. She thought she'd won the family battle, but now she knew some victories aren't what they seem. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt like a heartbeat, the slow echo of time moving forward, whether we wanted it to or not. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows, and the moonlight spilled across the floors in cold silver streaks. I lay awake in the room that had once been mine, the quilt pulled up around my shoulders, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying the look on Marissa's face as she read my grandfather's letter, shock giving way to disbelief, then to something that looked a lot like fear. She'd built her whole identity around the idea that she was the rightful heir, the one who would finally bring order and pride back to the family. But the safe had stripped that all away. I got up and padded down the hall in my bare feet, the cold wood grounding me as I moved. The study door was open just a crack, a sliver of light spilling out into the dark hallway. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open and stepped inside. Marissa was sitting in the old leather chair behind the desk, her hands still clutching the stack of papers, like they were the only thing keeping her anchored. She looked up when I entered, her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow. "You couldn't sleep either?" I asked quietly. She shook her head, the motion small and tired. "It doesn't feel real," she said softly. "I keep thinking if I read it again, it'll change." I walked over and sat in the chair opposite her, the scent of old paper and dust thick in the air. "The truth doesn't change," I said, "no matter how much we want it to." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "Why didn't you say anything before? Why didn't you tell me?" I sighed, leaning back in the chair. "Would you have listened, or would you have thought I was just trying to take it away from you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside and the soft creak of the house settling around us. Finally, she set the papers down on the desk, her shoulders slumping. "All this time, I thought I was the only one who cared about this family," she said. "The only one who deserved to carry it forward." "You cared," I said. "But you cared more about being the one who won." She flinched like the words were a slap. But she didn't argue. Instead, she picked up the top page of the letter again, her fingers tracing the careful script of our grandfather's handwriting. "I thought I was honoring him," she said quietly. "But he was hiding so much, and I didn't even see it." I watched her for a moment, then leaned forward. "Marissa, you're not the only one who loved this family. But love doesn't mean burying the truth. It means facing it, even when it's ugly." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with tears. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "You don't have to fix it," I said gently. You just have to stop pretending it isn't there. She closed her eyes, her breath hitching in her throat. For the first time, she looked like the girl I remembered from our childhood, the one who used to sneak into the kitchen late at night with me, to steal cookies, who used to press her ear against the safe and wonder what secrets it held. The girl who had dreams that were bigger than this house, bigger than the weight of the family name. You were never dead weight, you know, she said suddenly, her voice breaking. I said that to hurt you, but it wasn't true. I felt something in my chest loosen the old ache of her words, finally letting go. I know I said, but you needed to believe it was true, so you wouldn't have to see what you were really carrying. She let out a shaky breath and nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, she said, her voice low. For everything. I nodded, my own eyes stinging. I know. For a while, we just sat there in the quiet, the safe still open behind her, the papers spread out on the desk between us. It felt like the first honest moment we'd shared in years. No games, no careful lies. Just the truth, raw and heavy and real. Finally, she looked at me, her expression steadier. What do we do now? She asked. We tell the family, I said. We show them what's in here. We let them see the truth, even if it's hard. She swallowed, then nodded. Okay, she said. Okay. The next morning, we called everyone back to the house. Aunt Ruth, Uncle Henry, the cousins who'd scattered over the years, but had come back for the reading of the will. They all gathered in the living room, the tension so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Marissa stood in front of them, the stack of papers in her hands. She looked at me once, and I gave her a small nod. I thought I understood what this house meant, she said, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. But there were things I didn't know, things my grandfather wanted to hide. She started reading from the letter, her voice steady as she shared the truth. The room was silent, every face turned to her, every eye watching as the story they thought they knew was rewritten before them. When she finished, she looked up, her shoulders squared. I know I've made mistakes, she said, but I won't keep lying to you. We can't keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Aunt Ruth was crying softly, her hand pressed to her mouth. Uncle Henry sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful, the hard lines of his face softened by something like relief. No one spoke for a long moment, and then slowly they began to nod. One by one, they accepted what she'd shared, not because it was easy, but because it was real. Afterward, Marissa and I sat on the porch, the cold autumn air sharp and clean. She looked over at me, her expression tired but calm. I don't know what happens next, she said. Neither do I said. But at least it'll be the truth. She smiled a small, genuine smile. Thank you, she said, for not letting me keep lying to myself. I looked out at the garden, the last of the roses still blooming stubbornly in the cold. We're all still here, I said. And that has to count for something. The family battle wasn't over. Maybe it never really would be. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were finally ready to fight for something that mattered. Not for pride, not for the house, for the truth. The sun was just beginning to set as I walked through the house one last time, the golden light slipping through the old wavy glass windows. Dust motes drifted in the beams of light, each one catching for a moment before disappearing. The air felt different now, clearer somehow, like the house itself was breathing a little easier. Marissa was upstairs packing the last of her things. She decided to take some time away from the house, maybe visit friends or family she hadn't seen in years. She said she needed space to think, to figure out what came next. And for the first time, she didn't say it like she was running away. She said it like she was ready to face the truth she'd tried to ignore for so long. I found myself in the study again, the safe still open, the last rays of sunlight catching the brass handle. The papers were gone now, given to Aunt Ruth for safekeeping, a decision we'd all agreed on together. They weren't secrets anymore. They were just part of the story we'd all been trying to rewrite in the dark. I ran my fingers over the smooth edge of the desk, the wood warm under my touch. I thought about my grandfather, about the weight he must have carried, trying to keep the family together, even as the cracks grew deeper. I thought about how I'd let that weight settle on my own shoulders, without even realizing it, but I didn't feel it anymore. Not the way I used to. Outside, I could hear the faint laughter of the younger cousins playing in the yard. They didn't know the whole story yet, and maybe they never would, but they didn't need to carry it the way we had. That was enough. Marissa came down the stairs, a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She looked at me as she reached the bottom step, her expression uncertain but calm. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said. "And thank you." I nodded. "You don't have to thank me. We both needed to see the truth." She smiled a small, sad smile. "I know. But I do. You didn't have to stay, but you did." We stood there for a moment in the fading light, the quiet of the house wrapping around us like a soft blanket. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, just a simple, honest understanding that we'd both been changed by what the safe had revealed. "I'll be back," she said finally. "When I'm ready." "I know," I said. "Take your time." She nodded, then turned and walked out the door, the screen door creaking shut behind her. I watched her go, the last of the sun catching in her hair, as she stepped off the porch and into the cool evening air. I let out a long breath, my shoulders loosening as I turned back to the study. The safe was empty now, but it felt full in a different way. Full of the stories we'd finally let ourselves tell, the weight of the past we'd stopped carrying alone. I closed the safe door gently, the click of the lock echoing in the still room, not as a way to hide what was inside, but as a way to honor it, like closing a chapter in a book that had needed to be written for far too long. Outside, the laughter of the children drifted in on the breeze, the sounds of life continuing. I smiled, feeling something settle in my chest, something steady and sure. The family battle Marissa thought she'd won had never really been about the house or the money. It had been about the stories we told ourselves, the ones we believed, and the ones we were finally brave enough to let go. As I stepped out onto the porch, the sky was a blaze of orange and pink, the world holding its breath for just a moment before night fell. I stood there feeling the cool air on my skin, the quiet strength of the house behind me. This was still home, not because of the walls or the memories, but because of the truth we'd finally let in. A truth that would carry us forward stronger and more honest than we'd ever been before. She thought she'd won the family battle, but the safe had shown her and all of us that the only battle worth fighting was the one for the truth. And for the first time, it felt like we were ready to win it together.